The lake had always been Marcus Green's sanctuary. On quiet mornings, when the mist still hovered above the water and the sun turned the surface into liquid gold, Marcus would stand at the edge of his wooden dock with a fishing rod in hand. The water was still, the air fresh, and the only sounds were the soft splash of fish breaking the surface and the distant cry of birds in the trees. This was where Marcus found peace, where his children had learned to swim, and where his father once taught him how to bait a hook. The lake wasn't just scenery, it was memory, family, and history. His grandfather had bought the land generations ago, and the lake was part of that inheritance. The deeds were clear, the taxes paid, the property boundaries long established. But recently, the lake was no longer surrounded by just woods and farmland. Across the shore, new houses had sprouted up like weeds, expensive lakefront homes built by developers promising luxury country living. And with those houses came something else, the HOA. At the head of it stood Karen Whitfield, a woman whose presence was impossible to ignore. Her blonde bob was always perfectly styled, her sunglasses large enough to hide half her face, and her clipboard never left her side. She walked through the new neighborhood as if she were mayor of the valley, handing out notices, reminders, and warnings to anyone who didn't meet her standards. To Karen, rules weren't guidelines, they were weapons. Marcus knew her type the moment she appeared. She wasn't from here. She didn't know the history, the people, or the land. But she carried herself as though she owned it all. One hot summer afternoon, Marcus sat on his dock, his fishing line bobbing lazily on the surface. His youngest son, Tyler, sat cross-legged beside him, tossing stones into the shallows. The peace was broken by the sharp sound of heels clicking against the wooden planks. "Excuse me!" Karen's voice cut across the water like a siren. Marcus turned, squinting against the sunlight. Karen stood at the edge of his property, with two HOA board members behind her, both men in polo shirts and khakis, arms crossed like bodyguards. "This lake," Karen announced, waving a packet of papers in the air, "is not for private use. The HOA has voted, and effective immediately. All fishing, swimming, and boating are prohibited, unless authorized." Marcus set his rod aside and rose slowly to his feet. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with years of farm work in the lines of his hands and the steadiness of his gaze. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this lake belongs to me. My grandfather bought this land before you or your HOA ever existed. You don't get to tell me or my family what we can do here." Karen tilted her chin upward, her lips pursed in a smug smile. "That's where you're wrong. We have documents, bylaws, and community votes. This isn't just about you, Mr. Green. It's about what's best for everyone. And everyone has agreed the lake should be closed." Marcus stepped closer, his boots heavy on the dock. "You mean you decided? You and your friends in those houses across the water? But this lake isn't yours. It never was." Karen's smile faltered for just a second, then returned sharper than before. She turned to the board members. "Take note. He's in violation. We'll handle this formally." Tyler looked up at his father, eyes wide. "Dad, are they going to take the lake?" he whispered. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, his voice low but firm. "No, son. This is ours. Always has been. Always will be." Karen tucked her papers back into her clipboard with a dramatic snap and walked off, her heels clicking on the gravel path, the two board members trailing behind her. Marcus watched them go, his jaw tight. He knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to walk away from a fight, not when she thought she could win. The peace of the lake returned, but for Marcus, it felt different now. The water still shimmered, the birds still called, but beneath it all was a storm building, one that would pit him against the HOA in a battle for more than just property. It would be a fight for dignity, legacy, and the right to call the land his own. In the days after Karen's dramatic announcement, Marcus tried to convince himself that maybe, just maybe, it was bluster. He had dealt with pushy people before, folks who came into the valley acting like they knew better than those who'd lived there for generations. Usually they talked big, but when faced with the truth of deeds and boundaries, they backed down. But Karen wasn't like most people. She thrived on confrontation. And soon, Marcus realized she wasn't going away. It started small. One morning, as Marcus walked down to the dock, he saw a bright red sign nailed to a post near the water. Private property, no trespassing, HOA enforced. Marcus ripped it out of the ground and tossed it into his truck bed, shaking his head. He knew he hadn't put it there. He hadn't authorized it. Yet the next morning, another sign appeared, and then another. Every time he removed one, a new one replaced it. Bold letters accusing him of trespassing on his own land. Then came the phone calls. County inspectors showed up, clipboards in hand, claiming they had received complaints about an unsafe dock and environmental violations. Marcus, jaw tight, walked them through the paperwork. Permits his grandfather had secured, maintenance logs he himself had kept. The inspectors left empty-handed, but the message was clear. Someone wanted him tangled in bureaucracy until he broke. It wasn't just officials. Karen herself began to make appearances, striding up to the water's edge with her ever-present clipboard. She'd stand there for long minutes, staring at Marcus as he fished, scribbling notes like a school teacher, documenting a troublemaker. Once, she even brought a hired security guard, who barked at Marcus to vacate restricted property. Marcus laughed bitterly, pulling his deed from his pocket and waving it in the man's face. "Son, this land's mine. Always has been. You're the one trespassing." But the harassment didn't stop. When Marcus's kids went swimming, Karen filed a noise complaint. When his brother came by to launch a canoe, HOA members blocked the path, claiming boat access was suspended. Even neighbors he had once been friendly with began to avoid eye contact, whispering among themselves, afraid of choosing sides. One night, Marcus came home to find his mailbox stuffed with envelopes. Inside were citations from the HOA, threatening fines for unauthorized use of the lake, for illegal construction of the dock, even for excessive fishing. Each paper carried a demand for money and a warning of legal action. Sitting at his kitchen table, Marcus spread the papers out before him, his jaw clenched, his chest heavy. Tyler stood in the doorway, holding his little sister's hand. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" the boy asked softly. Marcus looked up, meeting his children's worried eyes. He forced a smile, though it felt heavy. "No, son, we're not the ones in trouble. They are." That night, when the kids were asleep, Marcus sat alone on the porch, staring across the lake. The houses on the opposite shore glowed with warm lights, silhouettes moving behind big glass windows. Somewhere over there, Karen was probably sipping wine and planning her next move. But Marcus knew something she didn't. This land wasn't just property. It was his bloodline, his legacy. And no HOA, no Karen, no stack of papers could erase that truth. Still, as the crickets sang and the lake reflected the moonlight, he felt the storm inside him grow. They weren't just trying to inconvenience him. They were trying to erase him. And Marcus Green was not a man who erased easily. By late summer, the harassment had gone from nuisance to siege. What began as signs and fines turned into a calculated campaign to push Marcus Green off his own land. Every week, a new envelope arrived, stuffed with threats and accusations. Some came from the HOA directly, others bore county stamps Marcus didn't recognize. Each one painted the same picture. "You don't belong here." They claimed his family's deed was outdated, his rights invalid, the lake community property that fell under HOA jurisdiction. Marcus laughed the first time he read it. He had the original documents, signed and notarized, going back nearly 70 years. His grandfather had been meticulous, filing every survey, every receipt, every tax record. The land was ironclad his. But the HOA wasn't arguing with facts. They were rewriting the story. One evening, as he stacked firewood outside his cabin, Marcus heard the crunch of gravel. He looked up to see a group of strangers in reflective vests, lugging measuring equipment down to the shoreline. "Hey," he called out, marching toward them. "What do you think you're doing?" A young man with a clipboard straightened nervously. "Surveyors, sir, hired by the Pine Valley HOA. We're here to confirm property lines." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You don't set foot on this land without my permission. You've got 5 seconds to turn around." The men exchanged glances. One muttered, We've got authorization from them, Marcus snapped, pointing across the lake toward the HOA houses. Not from me. And last I checked, this is still Carter Greenland. Now move! The surveyors packed up quickly, retreating under Marcus's glare. He stood at the water's edge until they were gone, fists clenched at his sides. The message was clear. They weren't just bluffing anymore. They were laying the groundwork for a fight in court. Karen's campaign of whispers spread through town. At the diner, Marcus overheard two men debating. I heard Green's deed isn't even valid anymore. Yeah, the HOA says the lake was never his to begin with. Man's just squatting, holding up progress. Marcus slammed his coffee mug on the counter, startling them both. You heard wrong, he growled, his voice low and steady. The men fell silent, eyes dropping to their plates. At home, Marcus began gathering everything. He pulled dusty boxes from the attic, sorting through yellowed deeds, maps drawn by county surveyors, tax receipts stamped and signed every year. His kitchen table became a fortress of paperwork. At night, while his children slept, he studied by lamplight, tracing signatures with his finger, highlighting sections of legal code. The more he read, the more his anger turned into resolve. His grandfather had known this day might come. That's why he had saved everything. Still, the HOA pushed harder. They blocked his driveway with parked cars when he tried to haul hay. They sent lake patrols to hover near his dock, arms crossed, taking pictures of him fishing. Once he came home to find his boat tagged with a neon orange sticker that read "Remove immediately, violation." That night, Marcus sat on his porch, staring at the water. The lake was calm, moonlight dancing on its surface, but across the shore, the HOA houses glowed like a different world. Karen's house stood out, the biggest, the brightest, with a row of tiki torches lined up along her dock. He could almost imagine her inside, sipping wine with her friends, laughing about how soon he'd be gone. Tyler stepped out sleepily, rubbing his eyes. Daddy, why do they hate us so much? Marcus pulled his son close, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. Because they don't understand, son. They think money makes the rules. They think papers and threats can erase what's real. He looked across the water, his jaw set. But this lake is ours, and soon enough, we'll prove it. The HOA thought they were tightening the noose. But Marcus wasn't hanging. He was loading the chamber. The county courthouse stood like an old sentinel at the heart of town, its brick walls worn by decades of battles just like this one. On the morning of the hearing, the square outside buzzed with whispers. Everyone in Pine Valley had heard about the fight over the lake. Some curious, some judgmental, some secretly hoping Marcus Green would put the HOA in its place. Marcus arrived early, wearing his best suit, the one his father had worn to church. It wasn't flashy, but it was clean, pressed, and carried with it a dignity money couldn't buy. In his hands, he carried a thick leather folder filled with papers, the deeds, the surveys, the tax records, all the proof of his family's ownership. He walked tall, his shoulders broad, his face calm. Karen, on the other hand, made her entrance like a queen. She swept up the courthouse steps in a sharp navy dress, her blonde bob perfectly styled, sunglasses perched on her nose, though the morning was overcast. Behind her trailed 3 HOA board members and a slick attorney in a gray suit, his briefcase gleaming. Karen's lips curled into a smug smile as her eyes locked on Marcus. She leaned toward one of the board members and whispered loud enough for him to hear, "This won't take long." Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Farmers, townsfolk, and new residents squeezed onto the wooden benches, the air thick with anticipation. The judge, an older man with a gravelly voice and a no-nonsense demeanor, entered and called the case to order. Karen's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth and rehearsed. He painted a picture of Marcus as a stubborn man refusing to follow community guidelines. He waved copies of HOA bylaws, citing rules about shared natural resources and communal safety. With each word, Karen nodded approvingly, her pen tapping against her clipboard like a metronome of smugness. "This man," the lawyer declared, pointing dramatically at Marcus, "has acted as though the lake belongs solely to him. But the evidence shows otherwise. The lake is common property, belonging to all residents of Pine Valley's community. His dock, his boat, his so-called private use, they are violations. The HOA demands that this court confirm our authority and order Mr. Green to cease all private activity on the lake. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others shook their heads. Karen crossed her legs, smirking, certain victory was near. Then Marcus's lawyer, a calm woman named Alicia Price, stood. She was younger than the HOA attorney, but her eyes were sharp, her tone steady. She walked to the bench with quiet confidence and placed Marcus's leather folder on the table. "Your Honor," she began, "the plaintiff's case is built on assumption and arrogance. But what we have here are facts." She opened the folder and pulled out a document yellowed with age. "This is the original deed, signed and notarized 73 years ago. It clearly states that the lake and surrounding property belong to the Green family. Every generation since has paid taxes on this land. Here are the receipts, decades of them, signed by this very county." She laid each record on the judge's desk, the pile growing higher with every page. The courtroom leaned forward, the murmurs shifting to gasps. Karen's smirk faltered. Alicia pressed on. "Here are surveys conducted by the county itself, confirming that the property lines encompass the lake. And here," she held up a black and white photograph, "is a picture of Marcus's grandfather fishing on the same dock the HOA claims is illegal. This photo is dated 1952. That's before most of these houses across the lake even existed." Laughter rippled through the benches, quickly hushed by the judge's gavel. Karen's lawyer sputtered, flipping through his notes, but Alicia wasn't done. She produced one final map, large enough to spread across the judge's bench. The surveyor's seal gleamed at the bottom. "This map, filed with the county last year, confirms what the deed and the receipts already prove. Not only does Mr. Green own the lake, but portions of the HOA's so-called lakefront properties actually extend onto his land. In their haste to claim authority, they have built decks, fences, and even part of a walkway over territory that does not belong to them." The courtroom exploded with noise. Reporters scribbled, neighbors gasped, and one man muttered, "Lord have mercy," under his breath. Karen's face turned crimson, her smug smile erased, her pen frozen mid-tap. The judge leaned forward, peering over his glasses at the stack of documents. His voice was steady, but the hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I see. Well then, I believe the plaintiff may have some explaining to do." Karen's lawyer stammered. This is irrelevant. Outdated." But his words drowned in the noise of a courtroom that had already chosen its side. Marcus sat quietly at the defense table, hands folded, his face calm. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He simply looked across the aisle at Karen, his eyes steady, and gave the slightest nod. He had been patient. He had been quiet. And now, the truth was louder than any of Karen's demands. The courtroom had been restless since Alicia Price laid out the evidence, but when she unrolled the county survey map across the judge's desk, the energy shifted entirely. You could almost feel the air thicken. People leaned forward on the benches, necks craned, trying to glimpse the lines and numbers that told a very different story than the HOA's carefully crafted narrative. The surveyor himself, a wiry man in his 60s with spectacles perched on his nose, rose from his seat at the back. He had been waiting quietly for his moment, and now Alicia beckoned him forward. He carried his own folder, filled with official stamps and notations that bore the weight of government authority. "Mr. Thomas Henderson," Alicia said, gesturing to him, "has been a licensed surveyor for over 30 years. He has reviewed the property boundaries extensively and will testify to their accuracy." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Henderson adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and tapped the map with his pen. "What you see here are the officially recorded boundaries of the Green property, established in 1949 and reaffirmed in multiple surveys since. This lake, every inch of it, falls squarely inside Mr. Green's property line. There is no ambiguity." The murmurs in the room swelled louder. The judge rapped his gavel. "Order." But Henderson wasn't finished. He shifted the map, pointing to the shaded areas that ran along the lake's edge. "And here," he said firmly, is where things become interesting. Several of the new developments, the HOA properties, have extended past their legal boundaries. Decks, fences, even landscaped yards have been built on Mr. Green's land. In plain terms, the HOA has not only harassed Mr. Green without cause, they've been trespassing on his property for years. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few sharp laughs broke through. Someone muttered, "Looks like the hunter just became the hunted." Reporters scribbled furiously, pens scratching across notebooks as cameras clicked. Karen's face drained of color, then flushed red. She shot up from her seat, her voice shrill. "That's a lie! That's impossible! We have property rights!" The judge's gavel slammed down. "Mrs. Whitfield, sit down, or I'll have you removed from this courtroom." Her lawyer fumbled with his briefcase, his confidence unraveling with each second. He tried to object, claiming the survey was outdated and inconclusive, but Henderson calmly produced the official county seal on the document, dated just the previous year. The judge inspected it, nodded, and leaned back in his chair. The verdict was already beginning to right itself. Marcus sat quietly at the defense table, his large hands folded in front of him. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. But inside, he felt a weight beginning to lift from his chest. For months, he had endured humiliation, signs nailed to his land, inspectors breathing down his neck, whispers painting him as a squatter on his own property. And now, in the heart of the courtroom, the truth rang louder than any HOA bylaw or Karen's shrill decree. Alicia pressed the advantage. She laid out photographs of the HOA's encroachments, yard furniture extending past the lines, a fence driven directly into Marcus's soil, even a dock that technically jutted into his property. "They have not only infringed on Mr. Green's rights," she declared, her voice steady and sharp. "They have stolen from him, while attempting to strip him of what is rightfully his." All eyes turned to Karen. Her hands shook as she clutched her clipboard to her chest like a shield. The smugness was gone, replaced by panic. She whispered furiously to her attorney, but his expression told the whole story. There was nothing left to argue. The judge shuffled the papers in front of him, his expression grave. "The evidence is overwhelming," he said slowly. "It appears that this court has not only been presented with baseless claims against Mr. Green, but also with clear proof of misconduct on the part of the HOA." The benches behind Marcus erupted again. Applause this time, quickly silenced by the gavel, but not before the sound filled the chamber. Karen sank into her seat, her eyes fixed on the floor, her face a portrait of disbelief. For the first time since this battle began, she had no words. Marcus sat tall, his gaze steady on the judge. Whatever came next, he knew the tide had turned. The HOA had tried to bury him with lies. Instead, they had buried themselves, and the whole town had just witnessed it. The judge sat in silence for a long moment, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the stack of evidence in front of him. The courtroom had gone still, so still that the creak of a bench echoed like thunder. Everyone was waiting. Karen shifted in her seat, her face pale but her jaw tight, as though she still believed she could bully her way through. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering rapidly, but the way his shoulders slumped told the truth. He knew it was over. Finally, the judge cleared his throat. His voice was low, steady, and absolute. "This court finds," he began, each word deliberate, "that the lake and surrounding property are the lawful possession of Mr. Marcus Green and his family. The evidence is clear and indisputable. The HOA has no authority over this land or its waters." The words crashed through the courtroom like a wave. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few cheers burst from the benches. Someone clapped before catching themselves, and though the judge rapped his gavel for silence, the energy couldn't be contained. Karen shot to her feet. "This is outrageous," she shrieked, her voice sharp with desperation. "You can't just hand him the lake. We voted. The gavel slammed again. The judge's eyes cut through her like steel. "Sit down. Mrs. Whitfield, this court does not recognize the authority of your HOA over land you do not own. Your behavior here borders on contempt." Karen froze, then sank back into her chair, her face burning red. The room hummed with whispers. For the first time since this fight began, she looked small, stripped of her power, her arrogance crumbling under the weight of the law. The judge continued. Furthermore, it is the ruling of this court that the HOA has engaged in harassment and unlawful interference with Mr. Green's rightful property. Damages are awarded to Mr. Green, and the HOA is ordered to cover all of his legal fees. Karen's lawyer closed his eyes and dropped his pen. The sound of it hitting the table was like a final bell tolling. Marcus sat still, his hands folded, his face calm. But inside, a storm of relief surged through him. For months he had been branded a trespasser, a squatter, a man standing in the way of progress. And now, here in open court, his truth had been spoken. Alicia, his attorney, placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "We won." Across the aisle, the HOA board members looked stricken. One muttered angrily under his breath, another buried his face in his hands. And Karen, once so smug, so sure, stared at Marcus with wide, furious eyes. She mouthed something, but no sound came out. Her clipboard slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. The judge banged his gavel one final time. "This case is closed." The courtroom erupted. Reporters dashed out to file their stories. Neighbors whispered in excitement. A few even reached forward to shake Marcus's hand as he stood, their faces glowing with respect. Marcus didn't raise his arms in victory, didn't boast or gloat. He simply turned toward the bench, gave a respectful nod, and walked out with his head high. For the first time in months, the weight was gone. The lake was his. His family's name was vindicated. And the HOA, once so loud and untouchable, had been silenced by nothing more than the truth. The days after the trial felt different in Pine Valley. For months, the air around the lake had been tense, filled with rumors, arguments, and the constant pressure of HOA demands. But once the judge's gavel struck, declaring the lake legally and forever Marcus Green's, that tension broke like a storm cloud finally passing. The courthouse story spread quickly. Local newspapers ran headlines, "Judge rules in favor of local landowner. HOA overstepped." Reporters replayed footage of Karen shouting in the courtroom, her face twisted with outrage, contrasted against Marcus, sitting tall and calm as the verdict was read. By the weekend, people across the county knew the tale of the HOA that had tried to steal a lake, and the man who stood firm against them. Karen vanished from sight. Neighbors whispered that she had resigned from the HOA presidency, though others said she was too embarrassed to show her face in town. A few of the board members sold their houses quietly, unwilling to live across from the man they had tried so hard to destroy. The HOA, once feared, became a joke. Meanwhile, Marcus's life slowly returned to what it had always been. Quiet mornings, the gentle ripple of the water, and evenings on the dock with his children. But it wasn't just the same. Something had changed. The lake felt alive again, free of the shadow that had hung over it. The water sparkled brighter in the sun, the trees surrounding it seemed greener, and the songs of birds carried further across the valley. Marcus believed in his heart that it wasn't just his imagination. It was the land breathing easier now that its rightful place had been restored. One Saturday, Marcus decided to host a gathering. He invited neighbors, both old friends and some of the newer residents who had once stayed silent during the HOA's campaign. Many came bringing food, folding chairs, and fishing poles. Children splashed in the shallows, their laughter echoing across the lake. Smoke from a grill curled into the sky as families shared stories, and music drifted over the water. Some of the newcomers approached Marcus hesitantly. One woman said, "Mr. Green, I'm sorry. I didn't speak up when I should have. I let them push you, and I shouldn't have." Marcus smiled, his voice steady and forgiving. "What matters is, you're here now. This lake isn't just mine. It's a part of the community, too. Everyone's welcome here, as long as they respect it." The woman's shoulders relaxed, and she nodded with relief. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Marcus sat on the dock with his son Tyler and his daughter Jasmine. The water reflected the fiery orange of the sunset, and fireflies began to blink in the grass along the shore. "Daddy," Jasmine said, her small hand dipping into the cool water, Is the lake safe now? Marcus wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Safe and ours, he said firmly. No one can take it away again. Not while we're here. Tyler grinned, casting his fishing line. Think Grandpa would be proud? Marcus's eyes softened. He looked across the lake, imagining his father and grandfather standing tall on the other side, watching. Yeah, he said quietly. He'd be proud we didn't back down. The sound of laughter and music floated behind them as neighbors continued to celebrate. But Marcus stayed on the dock, watching the ripples spread out across the water. The HOA had tried to erase him. They had tried to write him out of his own story. But in the end, all they had done was strengthen his bond to the land, his family, and his community. The lake shimmered under the stars as night fell. And for Marcus Green, it was more than water. It was legacy. It was victory. It was peace.